Here we are at the wonderful FoxTale's bookstore of Woodstock, Georgia, a great place to be, and I have the privilege of having with me as my guest Kimberly Brock, author.
Yeah.
How about that? You like that?
Yes.
I think that's great. And your book, your first book, is The River Witch.
Yes.
Let me start right off by asking you this, because people tell me that they struggle over titles and they have like 15 titles they go through at any one time. How'd you end up with The River Witch?
I went through several titles, and I'm terrible with titles. I'm finished with the book and still trying to figure out if I like my titles.
It's still
for
just
a
being
long
called
time.
book.
Mm-hmm. The book.
The
well,
book.
it gets called ugly things too, but
Oh.
by then. But by the end, it's the wonderful book. And what am I going to name
soon-to-be
the wonderful
published
book? So this book, The River Witch, came up with the title after the book was finished, and it has to do with some mythology, mermaid mythology, and it has a little bit to do with the setting, because it's set on the Sea Islands in Georgia, and there is a hoodoo house in the book. The woman who was the conjure woman no longer lives there, but the idea of the metaphor that the women in this book all sort of work their different kinds of healing magic in their families and between one another. So I leave it up to the reader at the end to really decide who the River Witch is.
Because Rosalind, when the main character, when she moves into this house where she goes to escape from certain things in her life,
Right.
the community talks about her as being a witch.
Yeah. There's a lot of superstition involved in small communities, whether you're on the Sea Islands or in Appalachia or anywhere where you're in a small community in particular. And I liked comparing and contrasting Rosalind's background growing up in the foothills of eastern Tennessee and the idea that people there are highly religious where she grew up. And then she moves to this little community that she thinks will be so different from where she comes from, and still runs into the same kinds of ideas and fears and ideas about mysticism and spirituality, and they're all part of the same human experience.
But you know, Kim, that's what gives the book its mood.
Yeah.
You know, I love that, because the whole time you're reading the book, you've got this mystique
Yeah.
about it. And you maintain that from the beginning to the end, which is a great compliment
Thank you.
to you.
Thank
I
you.
really do think that.
I worked hard at that.
Well, it stands, it stands there through. But you mentioned hoodoo. I wasn't familiar with hoodoo.
Mm-hmm.
I was familiar with voodoo.
Right.
Is there a difference between voodoo and hoodoo?
There is some, but it was specific to the Sea Islands, and as opposed to if you go further west on the coast. And I didn't incorporate it as thickly as you might expect. It's just little touches, because I wanted you to see that that's an art, I guess you could say, or a part of that culture that's being lost. And it's the same for the culture that Rosalind comes from with the Sacred Harp music in
Which is an
Appalachia.
actual occurrence. The Sacred Harp music. I had never heard of that before, and then I got into it, and then I kind of Googled it and realized this is an actual fact. This is a type of music associated with different people.
And it's old, it's ancient, and I liked the idea of people bringing these things with them through generation after generation after generation. And every culture has those things that are sacred to them and mean something. And I think the women in our families often are the ones who tell the stories and who teach the children, the songs, and those kinds of things aren't lost if the women are strong in the families.
Well, I think too that one of the strong points of your book too is pointing that out, that there is a heritage that is handed down generation to generation to generation. And personally, I feel like a lot of our heritage is being lost because we don't communicate it like we used to.
Right.
People used to communicate with each other more, communicate around the supper table
Right.
or whatever. But in your book, that's such an integral part that this heritage comes down layer after layer after
And I
layer.
tried to make sure that it was a contrast because you see the things that are being lost. And I tried to show through the environment where she's at, even the alligators in the book represent
Which
just
are a
this
big part of the book,
ancient,
too.
You know, this ancient song and this ancient creature that continues to exist while everything else is changing. So there's a lot of contrast in the book in that way.
Did you go down to the? See, you didn't.
No, I spent time there
Well,
when I was
I
a
swear
child.
you would think you had been down there doing research for the last year.
No,
or so.
I was at my kitchen table. But
And in your mind, you were traveling.
Yeah, I spent time there as a little girl because my dad's best friend from high school and elementary school had a house down there when I was very small.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it made an impression.
Well, is the location in the book though an actual location? Because I want to go there.
I know, I do too. I want to live there. But I also based it loosely. I have a friend who has a little shrimp shack beach house down in Florida, and she took me there one summer, and so a little bit of that is in there too. Just the idea of being able to get away and.
But I want to
sanctuary.
stress to the viewers that this is your first novel.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you had short stories published before.
Yes, I have one piece in an anthology, and then I have another piece that should be out in, I'd say at the end of May, June.
But this is your first book,
novel.
First novel. And there are things in this book that are indicative of a person who has been writing.
I'm
And-
older than I look.
I think in the book you get the feeling of old souls, you know. And but the way that you maintain, like I said, the mood, the way you describe the area, and then there's such restraint and a lot. You know, you're telling a story of a possible romance in the story, but you're very restrained. You draw back, and most first-time novelists just want to get it all out there on the table and show everything they can do at one time and don't show restraint. So that's amazing that you did it that way.
Well, that's a compliment. It was very intentional. I didn't feel that Rosalind's journey was a romantic quest. I didn't feel that Yuri's character was in any place to fulfill a romantic quest. He's the ghost in
Because
the book.
these are damaged souls.
And Yuri's the one that doesn't come back from that.
Yeah. Don't give too much away. Don't give too much away in the story. But you know, I heard you talking here tonight. You know, but tell us about the germ of thought that created this book.
I found an article in a magazine, and it was pictures of a pumpkin farm. These women had bought a little farm, and they were growing all these different kinds of pumpkins. So they were gourds and pumpkins, and it was all these warm, beautiful, round, sumptuous just fruit, and it looked so very feminine and sensual and fertile, and it was just a bountiful table. They were celebrating a harvest festival, and I wanted to go there, and I kept looking at those pictures and thinking, I've got to write something about this, got to write something. And I knew that it needed to be about female needs and desires and strengths and life. It looked like life. And I wrote little pieces for a while about that, and that's where Rosalind's character first started to come to me. And she was the hardest to write, really up till the last page. About a year later, I saw a report, and it was a town that had a river, and they had those giant pumpkins, and they had hollowed them
And go
out.
to the book again.
And the giant pumpkins are in the river, and people are racing in these pumpkins, and it was this joyous, wonderful event. And the first pieces that I started writing with Rosalind were sad, and she was without a child and barren. And then this other image was so joyful. And the contrasts came together, and that's when Damascus came onto the scene.
Who is such a
and
key
once
character.
10-year-old Damascus started talking, then the book took off. So,
Which is the character, you know, as important as Yuri and Rosalind and JB and is it Iris? Who's the aunt?
Ivy.
Ivy. It's important they are. Damascus, dominates the scene every time she appears.
Yeah.
She's such, and
She takes over for
yeah,
sure.
I mean, she's like, the young girl and the member of the wedding, and something Flannery O'Connor
Yeah.
would have conjured up. She's just enjoyable from beginning to end.
Thank you.
But now, how long did it actually take you to write the book?
About 5 years.
Whoa!
About 5 years. And
Don't tell me it's going to be 5 years before you get another novel.
No, I'm in the middle of one.
Okay.
So
All right,
another year or two. But at the 5 years, you have to take into consideration I had a baby. So and I think all of the motherhood.
Those things are important
So,
too. Yeah.
So I had a child, and I sent this book out several times and revised and revised and revised. So it's had several incarnations.
Well, we have to say that you and I met 5, 6 years ago at the Margaret Mitchell House in Atlanta. Patty Callahan Henry was
Yes.
sponsoring a book signing for Mary Alice Monroe.
Yep.
I think that was it.
It was.
And we ran into each other, and you told me at that time that you were writing a book.
Yep.
And I have to admit, my attitude
kind
was,
of blew your
"Oh, that's so
mind." I
sweet.
know.
Bless your heart, you're writing a book."
I know.
Yeah.
Well, once you say
And then we stayed in
ballerinas
touch.
and alligators,
Hey, that's a good hook. But we stayed in touch, and
Yep.
you did write a book. I mean, there's so many people that I meet who say, "I'm going to write a book," and then you never hear from
It's a
them
matter
again.
of just
But
doing
you
the
were
writing.
there, and over the years you kept going, and then you hooked up with Bell Books finally.
Yes.
That's who published your book,
Mhm.
and Deb Smith.
Oh yeah.
Who
She's
is
brilliant.
the head of Bell Books.
Yep.
So, how did it feel when you actually found out, hey, somebody wants my book and they're going to publish it?
It was relieving because I didn't want this book to just sit in a drawer.
Yeah.
I mean, I've written 3 or 4 books that I don't mind if they sit in drawers, but this book I didn't want to sit in a drawer. And I was also really, I was really glad that it was going to Deb Smith. I felt like she would respect the story and understand it and nurture where I needed that.
You have your own individual voice, but Deb has written
yeah.
books that have a similar sort of mood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Not that you're copying her, I'm just saying
No.
there's a familiarity and a
No,
kinship there.
there is, and I think it comes from where we grew up. We both grew up in North Georgia, so we know that. We know those people. We know those our people and our folks, and we know those hills and the dark places that can take you, and the family that's involved in that, and the faith that's involved in that.
Well, let me say, you finished your journey on this book, and it's
I'm proud
been
of it.
very, very successful. You should be proud of it, and I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
And I thank you so much.
I'm so glad to share it with
I
you.
know, isn't that fun?
Yeah.
But thanks for being the guest today. And
Thank
thanks
you.
to FoxTale Books for letting us come here and have the interview and celebrate
That's great.
the kickoff of the book. Thank you so much, Kim.